Hi everyone, welcome back to the weekly study. I'm glad that you're joining with me for some time of study and reflection. We are continuing with our study of Genesis. We last left off in the middle of chapter 26, and so we're going to be picking up there beginning at verse 23 and making our way all the way through the end of the chapter, through verse 34. Just a quick review of what we've studied so far in this chapter. This chapter 26 is the only chapter in Scripture that is devoted to the story of Isaac, just Isaac himself. And we learned about Isaac, that a famine came to the land, and so Isaac went down to Gerar with his wife Rebekah, following the ways of his father Abraham. Remember, he lets Avimelech, the ruler of the Philistines in the place of Gerar where they're settling, informs him that Rebekah is actually his sister because he's worried about what the townspeople will do. We talked about that story. That was now a couple of weeks ago. And then last week we read about Isaac's successes. He was so successful monetarily and it seems business-wise in Gerar that actually the townsfolks, including Avimelech, asked him to kind of leave the town because he's becoming too successful. And so we thought about that, and Isaac redigging the wells of Abraham and making his way kind of out of the city and settling on his own. And so this section, which begins with verse 26, with verse 23, is Isaac continuing the journey and another encounter that Isaac has with God, and then actually with Avimelech and his kind of head folks of the Philistines. And so I think we'll be thinking about in this chapter, or this section of the chapter, who Isaac is becoming as a person, the groundwork that he is laying to make sure that he is the heir that is following Abraham, but also looking closely and paying attention to the ways in which things might be not so sure or not so confident as we were with Abraham. And so thinking about how that is going to be passed on to the next generation. And we'll be thinking about that a lot, especially, I think this is the point of the chapter as we begin with chapter 27. But for now, we'll stick with chapter 26 as we think about Isaac and his continued development. So stick with us. From there he went up to Be'er Sheva. That night the Lord appeared to him and said, I am the God of your father Abraham. Fear not, for I am with you, and I will bless you and increase your offspring for the sake of my servant Abraham. So he built an altar there and invoked the Lord by name. Isaac pitched his tent there, and his servants started digging a well. And Avimelech came to him from Gerar with Ahuzat his counselor and Phichol chief of his troops. Isaac said to them, Why have you come to me, seeing that you have been hostile to me and have driven me away from you? And they said, We now see plainly that the Lord has been with you, and we thought, Let there be a sworn treaty between our two parties, between you and us. Let us make a pact with you, that you will not do us harm, just as we have not molested you, but have always dealt kindly with you and sent you away in peace. From now on, be you blessed of the Lord. Then he made for them a feast, and they ate and drank. Early in the morning they exchanged oaths. Isaac then bade them farewell, and they departed him in peace. That same day Isaac's servants came and told him about the well they had dug, and said to him, We have found water. He named it Shivah. Therefore the name of the city is Be'er Sheva to this day. When Esau was 40 years old, he took to wife Judith, daughter of Be'eri, the Hittite, and Basmat, daughter of Elon the Hittite, and they were a source of bitterness to Isaac and Rebekah. So what do we learn from this last section of chapter 26 about Isaac? Well, what we can say kind of on a first glance is that Isaac settles himself in a new area called Be'er Sheva. We'll talk about, or Be'er Sheba, you might be familiar with the pronunciation. We'll talk a little bit about the name and what that name means. and he makes a pact, an agreement, a treaty with Avimelech and the Philistines in the area. And it seems like things are looking up for Isaac. So all in all, I think we could probably just read these verses pretty quickly at first glance and say Isaac's continuing to settle in the land and continuing to kind of develop a presence for himself, and I would say a recognition in this chapter, in this section of the chapter, that he's a source, a force to be reckoned with. He has real significance, so much so that other folks and other kind of nations, tribes, groups are wanting to make treaties with him. So he's really setting himself up for success. So let's kind of think about this in a little deeper of a level, going through kind of each verse and thinking about how they, what they might mean for us. So Isaac goes to Beersheba. If we're remembering, which is hard to remember, it's hard to put all of these details together and remember, but Beersheba actually already exists. We actually already learn about Beersheba from Genesis chapter 21. So not too long ago, just 5 chapters ago, Abraham is in Beersheba. And actually, Abraham is the one who calls it Beersheba. And it's because he creates a pact, an agreement with Avimelech, the same individual. So things, again, as we've talked about in the past weeks, especially when it comes to Isaac, things begin or continue to repeat themselves, obviously in different ways, but the sons follow the fathers. The generations follow each other, but obviously we want to always pay attention to in what ways are they different and in what ways are they similar. But I didn't even remember that Beersheba actually already exists, even though they're going to rename it again. So makes us think about, why is that the case? God appears to Isaac. We know that God appeared to Isaac, if we remember a couple of weeks ago, at the beginning of this chapter, at the time of the famine, saying, "Don't worry, I'm with you." Here again, God appears to him at night and says, "I'm the God of your father Abraham, and I'm also going to be with you." I think what we can read in between the lines here, if we want to think about it a little bit at a deeper level, is I think this is the feeling that every child has of their parents, or everyone in the next generation. The promises of when you're a child is that your parents are going to look after you, and they're going to take care of you. And then when you grow into adolescence and adulthood, and you become your own person, you wonder where the source of that blessing or protection is going to be. And in some ways, it will be from your parents, but in some ways, it needs to be for yourself. And I think here, Isaac is concerned and worried as he continues to grow and become a person, and his own person. In what ways will God be with him? And so I think it's very telling that God says, "I'm the God of your father Abraham, but fear not, for I am with you." Yes, I was with Abraham, and the reason I'm blessing you is because of Abraham, but I'm also going to be with you. I also have a special connection to you. Isaac responds by building an altar and invokes God's name. That is the classic, kind of response in antiquity, in recognition, a public recognition of God and God's kindness to you, is to build an altar, to offer a sacrifice. We might think about it in today's equivalent as making a donation to an organization. So-and-so has donated, on behalf of, the good things that they've had and done, that God's blessings in their lives, or something like that. This actually was noted to me by one of the commentaries I was reading, was that this is the first time that Isaac publicly recognizes God, makes a public recognition of God. So perhaps what we could take from that is that what I was mentioning before is that this is maybe the first time that Isaac feels that he's actually in a secure place with his relationship with God. I guess I think then the question that we might want to ask ourselves as we reflect on this, on Scripture, and think about the ways that it speaks to us, is what was that moment for you in your life where you felt like you had your own individual relationship with God? That it wasn't simply the relationship of God that your parents taught you, or that you grew up with, but where you were able to develop that own secure relationship. maybe we're still looking for that. But I'm curious also if you felt like there's been a moment in your life where that happened. And so we learned that after Isaac builds this altar, he sets up a tent. He's kind of, in some ways, setting up some type of permanence. And they start to dig a well. This is the story that this is what folks are doing. They're trying to make sure that they find the life source, the water, so that they can live there. If we want to think about it at a kind of a allegorical or spiritual level, now with this sense of security that Isaac has in his spiritual life, he's now going to drill down to kind of a deeper level to kind of root that relationship with God through a well, so to speak, through a connection to kind of God's living waters and presence. And so Isaac is in a good place. He's feeling confident about his relationship with God, that he's settling in this new area. And don't get too comfortable, Isaac. All of a sudden, Avimelech comes to him from Gerar, and Ahuzat, his counselor, and Fichol, the chief of his troops. Probably a little worried. Why is the chief of the troops coming? Why is Avimelech coming to me? Isaac thinking to himself, haven't they already kicked me out of the land? Maybe he's worried that there's going to be some type of war or some type of conflict, which he's already been trying to avoid at what we've learned over last week as well, as he keeps on kind of moving farther and farther away. So Isaac says, probably in the not most suave or political ways, why are you here? Why are you bothering me? Like, weren't you the ones who kicked me out of the land? Why are you still here? Or why are you pursuing me? What's it to you? And so they say, we see that you are blessed and that God is with you. And so we want to make sure that we have a treaty with you. We want to make sure that we're at a good place, because we see, just like we saw with Abraham, your father, that you are going to be a successful person, a mover and a shaker, so to speak, in the world. And so we want to make sure that we're aligned with the right people. So the terms of the treaty, it just seems like you be good to us and we be good to you. Right? Let's make a pact. Don't do any harm to us, just like we have not done any harm to you, and we'll be always deal kindly with each other, and we'll be kind of trying to live peacefully together. Isaac doesn't respond. We can assume that he agrees to it because the next verse says that he makes a feast for them, and they ate and drank. So kind of a symbolic acceptance that they can now sit down and break bread together and eat, and kind of mark the acceptance or the ratifying of the treaty. Then early the next morning, they exchange their oaths. Isaac bids them a farewell, and they depart in peace. And this is the first day of this new agreement. And that same day, we learn in verse 32, is when the servants come and tell Isaac that the well that they had begun to dig just a few verses earlier, probably at some point earlier, they found water. We have found water. So this is a auspicious moment. It portends that good things are going to happen, that they are able to find water in this moment, in this day, signifies that Isaac is in a good place, that life and prosperity will continue to come for him. And so while we learn about this kind of sense of prosperity and the sense that Isaac is really solidifying himself as Abraham's heir, we also know that this comes, with great power comes great responsibility. Isaac's going to need to pass this on to the next generation. If you'll remember, this is from a few weeks ago, it seems like chapter 26 is chronologically out of order. We know that Rebecca is here in the picture somewhere, but we don't know about any of the children. So it could be that this is before they have children. And so at this moment, we're kind of here pausing to reflect about what it means to pass on to the next generation. Now that Isaac or we ourselves are feeling comfortable and situated wherever we are, what do we do to make sure that we have to pass on whatever it is to the next generation? And we understand how challenging it is. And so that's why I think these verses end the chapter with talking about Esau marrying kind of people that Isaac and Rebekah don't like. Isaac's favorite son, as we know from the previous chapters, whether we want to read this chronologically or not, but we know now already from just our reading of Scripture from the previous chapter that Isaac's chosen son was Esau, while Rebekah's chosen son was Jacob. And this chosen son, Esau, who presumably at this point, though we know that it's going to be Jacob, but within Isaac's eyes, Esau's the one who's going to carry on the family kind of title in some ways. But Esau takes two wives from kind of outside of the clan. He marries out of the kind of faith or nation or group, and these marriages are a source of great bitterness for Isaac and Rebekah. And so I think while the chapter kind of gives us this upward trajectory of Isaac really kind of continuing to build on himself and feeling secure and confident that he is going to be, this true next heir of Abraham, right at the end of the chapter, it kind of we're halted. It pauses, and it makes us then think, or startles us to say, Isaac, watch out. Things are coming, and you need to be aware of what's happening, and it's going to take a tremendous amount of awareness, power, ability, strength to pass this on to the next generation. So while you might feel this successful upward rise, the end of the chapter here, before we go into chapter 27, which we're eagerly anticipating, which for many of us we know about the birthright and the switching of the order, and Rebekah helping out Jacob, and Jacob kind of taking the birthright from Esau, all that good stuff. Before we get to that drama, there's this moment of reckoning, I think, for Isaac, that yes, he is Abraham's heir, but how is he going to be able to pass it on to his sons, or to the next generation? Okay, so thank you for joining me. I hope you enjoyed the study, and we'll be back next week, and we'll be starting with chapter 27 of Genesis.